Welcome back to Chess Tactic Today. In this titled Tuesday showdown, Magnus Carlsen faces off against the ever-dangerous Dmitry Andreikin, and right from move 1, chaos breaks loose. With h4 and h5 on the board, this game explodes into an unorthodox opening turned tactical masterpiece. Every move feels like a punch and counterpunch, and just wait till you see how both players handle the madness. And right out of the gate, Andreikin starts with pawn to h4. This is not your standard textbook opening, folks. It's a provocative move, immediately taking the game into strange territory and asking Magnus, "Are you ready for a fight?" Magnus responds calmly with pawn to d5, the most classical reply. He's not getting flustered, he's just grabbing his share of the center and saying, "Okay, I see your flank attack, but I'm sticking to the fundamentals." And Andreikin doubles down, pushing the pawn to h5. He's trying to cramp black's kingside and create a long-term nuisance. This is a high-risk, high-reward strategy. In response, Magnus plays pawn to f5, building a strong pawn duo in the center. The battle lines are drawn. White is playing on the edge of the board, while black is building a fortress in the middle. White plays pawn to e3, a solid move to support the d4 square and prepare to develop the light-squared bishop. Black strikes back with pawn to c5, immediately challenging white's central control. Magnus is not waiting around, he wants to open lines for his pieces. Pawn to b3 from Andreikin. The plan is clear. He wants to fianchetto his light-squared bishop to b2, where it will stare down the long diagonal at black's position. Black develops the knight to c6, a natural move that adds pressure on d4 and prepares to control key central squares. Bishop to b5. White puts a pin on the knight, creating some immediate pressure on black's structure. This is a classic way to disrupt development. And Magnus plays pawn to h6, an interesting choice. He's not just stopping white's h-pawn for good, he's also preparing to kick a white knight if it ever lands on g5, a very multi-purpose move. White completes the fianchetto with bishop to b2. Now we see the full picture of white's setup. Control of the long diagonal is the main theme. Black develops the bishop to d6, a very active square. It controls key squares and eyes a potential kingside attack down the road. Knight to f3. White develops another piece and puts some pressure on that central f5 pawn. And Magnus calmly defends with queen to e7. This not only protects the pawn but also prepares to connect the rooks. Very solid play. Knight to h4. Now this is a classic Andreikin move. He's rerouting his knight to a more aggressive post, maybe looking for a jump to f5 to attack the black king. Magnus develops his own knight to f6, challenging white's control and preparing to castle. He's meeting aggression with solid development. Knight to c3. Andreikin continues his development, getting another piece into the fight. And here comes pawn to a6, kicking that powerful bishop on b5. Magnus is asking the question, what are you going to do with this piece? White decides to resolve the tension, with bishop takes knight on c6. And pawn takes bishop. This creates doubled pawns for black, which can be a weakness, but it also opens the b-file for his rook. It's a classic trade-off. Queen to e2. White is preparing to castle queenside, getting the king to safety and connecting the rooks. This is a very important moment in the game's narrative. In response, Magnus plays pawn to a5. This move is so clever. He's preparing to open the file for his rook and create a direct attack on the white king if it castles queenside. The tension is building. Knight to a4, a good blocking move, stopping that pawn in its tracks and eyeing the c5 square. Rook to bait. Magnus activates his rook on the newly opened b-file. This is a great example of turning a potential weakness, the doubled pawns, into a real strength. Pawn to d3, a solidifying move from Andreikin, shoring up his center. And Magnus castles kingside. His king is now safe and his rooks are connected and ready for action. White castles queenside just as we expected, and now the battle is truly on. We have opposite side castling, which almost always leads to a sharp attacking game. Both players are going to race to checkmate the other's king. And here is the first big surprise, rook to b4. What a fantastic and creative move from Magnus. He's using his rook like an attacking piece, swinging it over to the center to put pressure on white's pawns and prepare for a central break. This is the kind of move that separates the best from the rest. White plays pawn to f4, challenging black in the center and trying to blunt the scope of that bishop on d6. And Magnus unleashes the storm with pawn to c4. This is a brilliant pawn sacrifice. He's tearing open the center to expose the white king. He's not interested in a slow, positional game. He wants to create chaos, and this move does exactly that. The real fireworks are about to begin. Andreikin accepts the challenge, with pawn takes pawn on c4. And Magnus recaptures pawn takes pawn. The lines are now wide open. Look at how all of black's pieces are suddenly buzzing with energy, aimed right at that white king. Bishop to a3, a very tricky move. White attacks the rook on b4, trying to win material. It looks like black is in trouble here, doesn't it? But Magnus has seen deeper. He plays pawn takes pawn on b3, completely ignoring the threat to his rook. This is a stunning in-between move. He knows that opening the b-file against the white king is far more important than saving the rook for a moment. What a display of confidence and calculation. White captures back, pawn takes pawn on b3, and the position is a tinderbox. And here it is, the brilliant shot. Rook takes pawn on f4. Wow, this is a stunning deflection. The point is that if white takes the queen on s7, black will recapture the white queen on e2. It's a tactic of the highest order that completely turns the game on its head, leading to a massive liquidation where black's piece activity will shine. White plays bishop takes bishop on d6, a logical move to remove a key attacker. And queen takes bishop, now the moment of truth. Rook takes queen on d6, accepting the trade. And rook takes queen on e2, the dust settles, and look at this position. Black has two incredibly active rooks for the queen, white's king is exposed, and black's pieces are perfectly coordinated. This is the climax of the game's tactical phase. Pawn to f3, trying to create some breathing room for the white king and control the g4 square. Knight to d5, a monster knight lands right in the center of the board. It controls everything and puts immense pressure on white's entire position. Rook takes pawn on c6. White wins a pawn, but this allows black's other knight to jump into the game. And there it is, knight to b4, attacking the rook and creating more problems for white to solve. Rook to c7. The rook finds a temporary safe square on the 7th rank. Bishop to e6, a fantastic developing move. The bishop controls key diagonals and prepares to support the attack. Rook to done. White tries to get his own rook into the game and defend along the back rank. And pawn to f4, Magnus is not letting up for a second. He continues to push forward, breaking down white's defenses piece by piece. Pawn takes pawn on f4, opening more lines. Another brilliant shot, knight takes pawn on c2. This is a devastating fork, attacking the king and the rook on done. It's not just about winning material, it's about the complete collapse of white's coordination. A powerful tactical sequence from Magnus. Rook takes knight, white is forced to give up more material. And rook takes pawn on f4. Black is now up material and his pieces are still dominating the board. The game is shifting from a tactical battle to a technical conversion. Knight to f3, desperately trying to regroup the white pieces. Bishop takes pawn on b3. Magnus is just cleaning up now, winning another pawn and simplifying into a winning endgame. Knight to c3, attacking the black rook. And bishop takes knight, a great trade for black. He removes a key defender and clarifies the path to victory. King takes bishop. The king is forced further out into the open. Rook to c8, putting the king in an uncomfortable pin. The pressure is absolutely relentless. Rook to d3, trying to block the attack and hold the position together. Rook to g4. Now the other rook joins the party, targeting the weak g2 pawn and creating a two-front attack. Rook to d2, a passive defense, but there are no good options. Pawn to a4, even in a winning position, Magnus keeps finding the best moves. This passed pawn is now a major threat and will distract white's pieces. Knight to f5, attacking the rook on g4. Rook to g5, a simple retreat, but the pressure remains. Rook to e2, trying to challenge black's control of the e-file. Rook to e8, immediately fighting for the file. Black is systematically taking over every part of the board. Knight to d3, trying to find a more active square. Rook takes rook, check. This is the final simplification. Knight takes rook. And rook takes pawn on g2. We are now in a pure endgame. Black has a rook and two passed pawns against a knight, and it's completely winning. Knight to f4, hitting the rook. Rook to h2, a perfect square. The rook ties down the white king and supports the advance of the h-pawn. King to c3, trying to get active, but it's too late. Pawn to g5, kicking the knight away. Pawn takes pawn. Pawn takes back. Now the h-pawn is a real monster, ready to march down the board. Knight to d4, trying to set up a blockade. Pawn to a3, that a pawn which started its journey so long ago is now just a few steps from queening. This is a classic decoy. White has to deal with it, which gives black's other pawns time to advance. Knight to e2, shuffling pieces around in a desperate defense. Pawn to h5, the steamroller begins, there is no stopping this. King to b3, going after that a pawn. Pawn to h4, too little too late, the h-pawn is just too fast. King takes a3, white captures one threat but the decisive one is on the other side of the board. Rook to f2, a beautiful final touch, cutting off the king from the action. King to b4, a lonely monarch far from the real fight. Pawn to h3, one step closer to glory. Knight to g3, a desperate attempt to block the pawn's path. Pawn to h2, the pawn is on the doorstep and it is unstoppable. King to c3, a futile move. Rook to g2, a brilliant move to dislodge the last defender. The knight on g3 is forced to move. Knight to e2, stepping aside. And rook takes knight, this is the final nail in the coffin. The h-pawn will now promote to a queen, and with that, Andreikin resigns. A masterclass in tactical play by Magnus Carlsen. What a masterpiece of attacking chess and tactical vision from Magnus Carlsen. From the creative opening to the brilliant queen sacrifice and the flawless endgame technique, this was a truly unforgettable game. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on Chess Tactic Today.